A network in AWS is called as a VPC. We learned from the previous lessons that a subnet resides inside a VPC, and then you will be hosting resources inside that subnet. Let's navigate to the AWS console and see how you can implement this pictorial representation. This console is not new to you anymore. This is the AWS console, and I'm connected to the North Virginia region. Let's navigate to the VPC section. So I'm going to type in VPC here in the search box, click on it, and it takes me right to the VPC in US East 1, as you see that in the URL here. Okay. Now, in the VPC dashboard, you can see the number of VPCs I have, the number of subnets, the number of route tables, and every other entity that's related with the VPCs. To start with, let's go to VPC section. And in one of the lessons, I did mention that by default, in every region, you do get a VPC. So if I move to the extreme right and look at the default VPC column, it says yes. That means this is the default VPC. Now, it also has a CIDR block of 172.31.0.0/16, right? Now, are there any subnets inside it? Let's go ahead and check that. Now I'll click on subnets on the left hand side, and then I notice that there are multiple subnets. There are like 6 subnets in each availability zone. North Virginia has 6 availability zones. If you recall from the AWS data center lesson, there were 6 availability zones, and one subnet each has been created in each availability zone here. Okay, so looks like this default VPC has 6 subnets. The CIDR block of the VPC is in /16 network range, whereas the subnets are individually chosen. And the CIDR block of the subnets are here as follows. What you also have here is the internet gateway that is attached to the VPC, all right? One thing that I want you to remember is that every resource has a unique identifier. Now, this default VPC has a unique identifier that looks like this, whereas subnets have their own unique identification. Okay. Now, how do I know whether these subnets are actually linked to the VPC here? Well, I'll go to the subnets and then look at the VPC column. All of them represent the same VPC. This is what tells me that all these subnets are in the same VPC. Okay. Now, if I go back to the internet gateway and then look at this one, this internet gateway is linked up to my VPC. And there is a route table as well, which is also linked up to my VPC. So these are the 4 entities that are required when you provision a custom VPC, when you want to deploy a VPC all by yourself and you do not want to use the existing VPC or the default VPC, then you have to provision these 4 things. One is a VPC itself. Then you provision the subnets inside the VPC. You then link the internet gateway to the VPC. Remember from the school analogy that we had doors to the classroom, and that's what allows the data in and out of that network. And that's what the internet gateway is doing. And finally, you write the routes in the route table so that you can allow the traffic in and out of your VPC. Okay. So these are the 4 sections that are very important for you to provision a VPC. That being said, I will go ahead and create a VPC now. Click on your VPC and then create VPC. I'll type the name of my VPC as test-VPC, which is okay in my case. This is just a demo environment, but if you're running these in your production environments, make sure that you know what your naming standards are, what your naming conventions are. Okay, I'll move on to the next section, which is the IPv4 CIDR block. If you recall from the previous lessons from the school analogy, we had the CIDR block as 192.168.0.0/16. I'm going to follow just that. Now, if you go back and look at the subnet calculator, you will know that /16 will let you create about 65,000 devices in that network. Now, this is a pretty big network to handle, and organizations usually do not need such big networks in the cloud. The next option is about whether you want IPv6 assignment to your VPC or not. Okay, by default, you're not getting an IPv6, which is okay. Because let's say you're provisioning any IoT devices and a lot of sensors on your network which need like millions of IP addresses, and that's when you may think about going to IPv6, and that's a good use case. But if you're provisioning virtual machines, database, doing the regular two-tier design or three-tier design, the /16 network should absolutely do the job for us. Okay, so I will stick to the first radio button and click on create. So that is my VPC now. Okay, so this is my custom VPC that got created. This is a unique identifier with the following setter block. So what do we do next? Remember, we got to create subnets, we got to create route tables and internet gateway. So there's a long way to go. Let's do that step by step. I'll click on subnets now and click on create subnet. Okay, and then I'm going to call this as subnet 1, and in the drop down menu I will select my custom VPC that I just created. The first one is the default VPC. All right, now I want to keep subnet 1 in my custom VPC and not in the default one. All right, so that's where it goes. The next option is about availability zone. North Virginia has about 6 availability zones, and you're gonna see all of them here. Where do you want to provision this subnet in? Okay, so I'm gonna select A here, and then also choose a CIDR block for this, which is, let's say, 192.168.30.0/24. If you do any mistake here, it's not gonna accept and it will error out right there on the screen. But I didn't get an error, looks like it's happy, so I'll click on create. Awesome. So my first subnet in my custom VPC is created now. So the next step is to go and create an internet gateway and attach it to my VPC. This procedure is simple. Just say create internet gateway, give it a name. I will type in test-vpc-internet gateway. All right, and click on create. That's done as well. The next step here is to attach it to my VPC. See, by default it is detached, right? So I need to just right click and then attach to the VPC, which will then give me the option, a drop down menu with a list of VPCs that do not have a gateway yet, right? So I do not have a default VPC here. Why? Because it already has an internet gateway. So I'm going to select that and click on attach. Done. One last step before we conclude this is creating the route table. But what you will notice is that a route table is already created for our VPC. Look at that, it's already linked up to our custom VPC, right? So we do not have to create a route table here, but instead you gotta go to the routes. After selecting the route table, go to the routes, and then what you will notice is that there is only one route available here. And what this route tells me that everything within the network, within this particular range, is routable and reachable. So if you got devices within the network, they would be able to talk to each other. Of course, the firewall rules must allow that, but here the routes are established. But if your device needs to be reachable and if it needs to talk to the internet, then you need to write that rule specifically. And this rule here just tells me that local traffic, the LAN traffic, will be able to reach each other. Okay, that's what it means. Now I'm going to edit routes and then add a route to the internet, right? Now internet is known as 0.0.0.0/0. That's what internet means. And where is that traffic allowed from? The traffic is allowed from internet gateway, which is this. Okay, now I'm going to click on save routes. That's done. Now I've got two routes. The route number 1 tells me that everything is locally routable within the LAN environment, within your VPC. The second one lets the traffic in and out from your VPC to the internet, right? This representation or this CIDR representation means internet. Okay, so once I provision my virtual machine inside my subnet, I will be able to connect to it from the internet. Let's go and see how that works. Okay, so that's my VPC. The next step here is to go ahead and create a virtual machine inside this subnet, right? So if you recall, in this lesson we started by drawing a diagram. And the diagram had a couple of boxes. We had the VPC, we had the subnet, and we had that EC2 instance as well. Now the next step is to create an EC2 instance. Let's do that. I'll click on Services, navigate to the EC2 dashboard, and then click on Launch Instance. Okay. Now keep in mind that EC2 is yet another section. We still have to discuss about what EC2 is and various nitty-gritties involved in creating virtual machines, and then we got to go a lot more in detail as far as EC2 is concerned. But for now, I'll quickly do next, and make sure that I provision a virtual machine, but I'll not be explaining much about EC2s in this section because the core focus is to understand networks. We'll understand EC2 in the next module. Okay, so for now, I will scroll down and say, hey, I want to create a Windows machine that is 2019 and select that. I'll make sure that it's got one CPU and 1 gigs of memory. That's fine. And in this drop down menu, I'll select my VPC and select my subnet. I'll also make sure that I get a public IP so I can connect to it. Finally, I'll click on Review and Launch, and I get a pop-up here. I'll explain this to you when time comes when we talk about EC2 in the next module. But for now, think about this key pair as a password to log into the machine. Okay, you need this key pair so that you can log in and retrieve your password. And you always got to keep this key pair carefully with you. Do not share it with unauthorized people, otherwise they'll be able to log into your Windows machine and gather that data. Now as you see, I have initiated the launch of an EC2 instance. I'll click on this random value, which is nothing but a unique identifier for my EC2 instance. Okay, so I clicked on that. All right, and it retrieved all that metadata for my EC2 instance. But what I would like you to notice here, while things are getting in place for us, this guy is pending, it's still initializing. Well, that's okay, but you can use this time to look at the metadata. Now, the VPC ID is this, which is our VPC. So if you recall, the name of the VPC was test-VPC, and the name of the subnet was subnet1, right? So we are following the protocols here. We are creating a virtual machine in the subnet in the VPC that we created. Okay. What we also have is a public IP address associated with this EC2 instance. Do not get confused every time I say EC2 instance because it's nothing but a virtual machine, right? In traditional environments, you had VMwares and Hyper-Vs, and we used to create virtual machines on top of that. Here in the AWS world, you call those virtual machines as EC2 instances. That's all. All right, I'm just waiting for this initialization to complete, and the instance state is running anyway, so that is healthy. That's good. And once it is ready, I gotta copy this public IP and launch my MSTSC, which is Microsoft Terminal Services Console. Paste that IP address here and just go click on connect. It's gonna fail, of course, for now because things are getting ready for us. All right, so it looks like I got a administrator and password screen here, but then I will not be able to retrieve the credentials till the time this initialization is complete. Okay, so I'm gonna pause this section, pause this video for now, and start it again once the initialization is complete as well. Okay, so I connected back and I'm gonna pick up this public IP one more time, launch the Microsoft Terminal Services Console, paste the IP address, click on connect, and then take care of this credential section, right? Earlier I did mention that I gotta have this PEM key, right? This is a key pair which I must have before I log in, right? Because I will retrieve the credentials with this PEM file. Let me show you how. So I'm gonna right click on my EC2 instance that just got provisioned, and then there's an option to get the Windows password, right? Now, of course, it's going to go into my downloads file. So I'm going to choose file and get that PEM file from there. Okay. As you see, I've chosen the Windows key pair.pem file, and the data inside that, which is a certificate information, it's all retrieved from there. Now I click on decrypt password and you will see random characters here, and that is your password, right? So I will copy that. All right. Copy just that and then go back to this console where I will type my user ID, which is mentioned right here, okay? And the password, I'll paste it from the clipboard and say okay. That's all. That's how quick that is, okay? And there you go, right? It is getting connected to a Windows-based machine, and that's how quick that is. It will take some time initially because number one, it has got such low memory. CPU and memory is just one in one, so it's going to take time to get to my desktop and settle down, right? Moreover, if I try to do some actions on it, it's going to be very slow because of the very same reason, right? But the objective here is to just show you the power of cloud as to how quickly you can provision resources, right? It's how fast that is. But let me try something here. So I'll launch the command prompt and then type in the IP config to retrieve its IP address. Now, if you notice, the IP address of this machine is 192.168.30.183. This is the same range as that of the subnet, right? So let's go back and look at that. Now I'll click on this subnet, right? This is the subnet that we provisioned a few minutes ago to create a VPC. Now the subnet that we have, the range that is mentioned here is 192.168.30. This is the network ID, and the last octet is the host ID in this case, right? Now what I did mention in the previous lesson is that the network ID will remain the same for all devices, but this last octet may change. And that's exactly what happened in this case as well. We got the same network ID, but the host ID will change every time you create new resources and provision new devices in this subnet. Hopefully you understood all about networks, subnets, internet gateways, and route tables, and how it can be provisioned in AWS quickly. In the next section, let's go ahead and learn about the security groups.